Hello and welcome. My name is Carol Carter. I'm from Global Minded. I'm here with Lisa Wyckoff, and we are delighted to welcome you to our second day of the Rural Resilience Week with Global Minded. And we are delighted to have an incredible panel of people today, and we'll share a little bit more about our sponsors, the Nathan Yip Foundation. But first, I just want to tell you a little bit about Global Minded and the work that we do. We are all about creating a capable, diverse talent pipeline to get more women, people of color, underrepresented, first generation to college, into the education, economic mobility, employment, and leadership pipeline. And we know that to do that, you need networks, role models, internships, and jobs. So we accomplish that through a number of different ways. We have an annual conference every year. This year, because of COVID, we took that conference over 9 weeks, and we've added on this week, which was going to be a whole pre-conference in and of itself. And then next week, we have a back-to-school session called Back to School in Times Like No Other. So we hope that you'll join us for the rest of the sessions this week and for next week. We also have Inclusive Leader Awards across 14 industry sectors. We know that until our diversity and inclusion leaders are as well known as sports stars and movie stars, we're not going to have the role models we need in a bunch of different sectors. So that's the second thing we do. And then finally, we work with colleges and universities around the country, historically Black colleges, minority serving institutions, and Hispanic serving institutions, tribal colleges, and community colleges to be able to bring resources, diversity and inclusion topics, and our daily newsletter where we feature many of the role models that people can read about every day. So that's a little bit about Global Minded, and I am delighted to tell you a little bit about our sponsor today. It's the Nathan Yip Foundation, and this is a Denver-based nonprofit organization that works with rural schools in Colorado to match them with donor funds, projects ranging from technology to professional development to basic classroom supplies and more. And you can learn more about them and what they do at nathanyipfoundation.org. So we'll put that in the chat. And before I introduce our moderator, I also want to share, if you all can put in the chat where you're from. It's really interesting for all of you to see the web of people who are really interested in rural inclusive leadership. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Ann Trujillo. Ann is our moderator today, and she co-anchors Denver's News in the Evening and is host of Politics Unplugged, a weekly talk show covering issues important to Coloradans. Ann began her career at Denver 7 as a general assignment reporter, where she worked her way up the ranks, covering stories from Columbine and Aurora theater shootings to the Democratic National Convention in Denver to 3 Broncos Super Bowl appearances. Ann has won dozens of Emmy Awards for her work as a broadcast journalist. Her reporting, writing, and anchoring skills have been recognized by the National Association of Television Arts and Sciences, where she is also a member of the Silver Circle for her years of service to journalism, and was also inducted into the Denver Press Club Hall of Fame in 2019. Throughout her career, Ann has been active in the community, now serving on the boards of There With Care and the Denver Scholarship Foundation, one of our partners. Ann was one of the founders of the Colorado chapter of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, currently serving as vice president. She also serves as member of an advisory council to the journalism department at both University of Colorado Boulder and Metropolitan State University, and is married to Mike, whom she met at Denver, and together they have 2 grown children. Ann still makes her home in Littleton, Colorado, where she grew up, and she's a graduate of Littleton High School, and she is a first-gen graduate of the University of Colorado. So she knows firsthand why our work exists. So welcome, Ann, and this incredible panel. We are so delighted to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm excited to get started because this is such an important topic to Colorado and really around the world right now. This is such an important conversation to have, and we have an impressive panel of educators joining us from the state of Colorado. So we are going to touch on some very important topics on education as seen through the lens of the rural community. We're also going to try and leave some time at the end for some questions. So if you have questions that you didn't feel, it was a topic that we covered, we'd love to talk about it. So you can submit your questions through the chat box function. Make sure you're sending your questions to everyone so that we can all see them, and we have someone filtering through all of those questions so that I get them and then able to ask them of our esteemed panel. So first, I would like to start by having our panelists introduce themselves, and you can actually read their full bios on the Global Minded website. But I'm going to call you out, and then if you'd give us a little bit of information about yourselves, we'll start with Tina Goar.
Thank you, Anne. Hi, I'm Tina Goar. Thank you everyone for joining us on this important conversation. My background, 42 years in education, formerly the Rural Liaison at the Colorado Department of Education, where I facilitated the Rural Education Council and was a key player in developing the Colorado Rural Education Collaborative. Currently transitioning from the executive director at the Northwest BOCES in Steamboat Springs to the executive director position in the San Luis Valley BOCES down here in Southern Colorado in beautiful Alamosa.
Fabulous. Okay, thank you. And Samantha Yocam?
I'm Samantha Yocam, and I'm beginning my 30th year in education. I moved to Kim as a first-year teacher and met and married my husband, who's a rancher. I was a math teacher here for 24 years, and then this will be my 6th year as superintendent. I spent 3 years in a small district called Vilas on 160, and now this is my 3rd year here back at Kim, which is my home.
How many people in Kim, Colorado, by the way?
Not many. I think the last census said 115.
Okay.
But I think that's stretching it. It's probably more like 87 in the city limits. When we have school, we have 40. Last year we had 46 kids pre-K through 12. That some lived in the district and some don't. We get some from outer areas.
Good to know. Thank you, Samantha. And Dr. Robert Mitchell. Welcome.
Hello, and thank you very much. I'm Dr. Robert Mitchell. I teach at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. I focus on all things rural, both in the western side of the state and the eastern side of the state. When I'm not doing that, I'm a volunteer teacher at the smallest school district in the state, even smaller than Kim, and that is the Campo School, which has 43 students this year, K through 12.
Terrific. All right. And last but not least, Luis Murillo. Hi, Luis. We're not hearing you for some reason. Let's try that one more time. I'm still having trouble hearing you. Is anyone else?
Yes, I can't hear him.
I wonder if he needs to turn up his volume. I'm going to send him a little IM.
We heard him perfectly during the rehearsal, everyone. So we want to make sure that we hear from everyone. So we will effort this. Now, I see your lips moving. Very strange.
It is.
Not muted. I mean, I don't show him muted.
I wonder if we should have Luis log out and jump back in.
That's what I would suggest. Yep.
Why don't we do that, Luis? And then what we might do is just go ahead and start the conversation. And I do want to include you. You're a vital perspective to add to this conversation. I just know that there's a whole lot of folks waiting. So why don't we do it that way, Luis, if you want to jump out and then jump back in, and hopefully we'll hear you just fine. Because obviously we're here to discuss rural education, what that entails, and there's so much to discuss. The Colorado Department of Ed defines a school district as rural based on its size and proximity to the nearest urbanized area. So a rural district will have fewer than 6,500 students enrolled. A small rural district will have fewer than 1,000 students enrolled. So to compare, Denver Public Schools, for example, the largest in our state, had over 92,000 students pre-K through 12. Last year, Campo, the smallest district in the state, had just 42. So when addressing rural schools, I've heard that we in Colorado like to classify rural districts into proximate rural, so that's districts not too far from an urban center, cowboy boot rural, remote districts, and ski boot rural, those are districts in resort areas. And each rural community is vastly different. We know that diversity comes in many different forms, especially when set in the rural context. So for our panelists, I'd like for you each to start talking about your community specifically. So what is your rural context? What does diversity look like in your district? And I'm going to start with Samantha, if you would, please.
We are a ranching community, and I have kids who ride the bus for 55 minutes one way to school. Our district is very large in area, but very small in population. So many of our kids, they rodeo and they play sports here. We're so small that we co-op with a neighboring school district so that we can have sports. Our diversity really is in the type of kids we have, because we are so remote and our kids aren't exposed to a lot of diversity. They enjoy like FFA and FBLA so that they can go out and meet kids from other districts who have much bigger populations and varying interests.
Okay, and I see that we have Luis back. So let's, hopefully we'll be able to hear from you. Hi, Luis. Oh goodness, and we are still unable to hear you. All right, we're gonna try that one more time with him. So let's skip on to Robert, if you would please talk about what your rural context is, what diversity looks like in your district.
For those of you that aren't familiar with Colorado, while we have some beautiful mountains and some beautiful areas, please remember that more than half of our state is really agricultural based and rural, especially our eastern part of the state. So as we think about rural in the state of Colorado especially, we're really crisscrossed by I-25 that goes north-south and I-70 that goes east-west. Close to 85% of our entire state population lives on one of those corridors of I-25 and I-70. As a result, rural looks very different all over the place, from the very agrarian rural in the east to the ski resorts in the central mountains to the ranch land in the northwest. So as we think about rural, we do have to realize that the different contexts do in fact impact so much of what we do.
Absolutely. And I see Luis is with us, and it literally says connecting to audio. So this is a good sign, Luis. And hopefully we can hear you. Hey, Luis, can you hear me? Hi there, Luis. If you're able to hear me, can you say hello? Okay, don't you love technology? This is so fun. Poor guy. That's just a little bit of stress. Hey, Luis, are you able to hear me? Okay, we are going to move on to Tina, short terms.
Lisa with Global Minded. I'm going to send him the phone number. It could be his bandwidth. He's having problems with his internet. So
Okay.
I'm going to send the call-in phone number, and maybe if he calls in.
Perfect. Okay, in the meantime, Tina, talk about the Steamboat area and your rural context.
Okay, so as Robert was saying, we have resort areas which are rural mountain areas. And in Steamboat, predominantly in the Northwest, it is quite diverse. And the diversity comes from our ski industry, which for approximately 6 months out of the year brings in quite the diverse population from all over the world, which also brings children into our schools. And it's a plus. And that diversity really strengthens the region, both culturally, academically. The tourist industry, obviously, and the ski industry totally thrives. But the diversity, as you all would know, has an economic impact, obviously, brings in people to work in our ski industry. So the diversity is quite significant and quite apparent to be honest. But like I said, it adds a richness to the rural. The rural for mountains means weather is your big challenge in going from school to school. And to give you a context of how big the Northwest region is, if you were to get in your car and drive around the entire Northwest BOCES region, you would put 600 miles at least on the mileage on your car. So that gives you an idea of how big we're talking when we talk rural. But our rural mountains in Colorado are thriving, and they are quite the diverse population and truly add to the richness of the state.
Absolutely. All right, Tina, thank you so much. And let's try to bring in Luis again if we can. I see we have a picture, and hi, Luis.
Hello, can you hear me now? I'm on my phone.
Yes, perfect. Happy to hear you and happy to see you. So because we know you have an important voice in this conversation as well. We're talking about, everyone's just going around talking about their rural context and what diversity looks like in your district. So could you talk about that for your area?
Yes, Center Colorado has about 2,400 population-wise, which is about 81% Latinx, 11% white, and the average household income is about $36,000, which puts us at about 25% poverty. The nearest city is Alamosa, Colorado, which is where Adams State University is, and that is somewhat of a larger town. There's a Walmart there, there's an IHOP, there's a Chili's. I do work for Center School District. Our population is about 600 students, which out of those, about 96% is Latinx. We have about a 67% students learning English as a second language. So that is our rural school district.
Sure. I know what is top of mind for everyone right now is COVID-19 and how our schools are going to handle opening in the fall. So being in rural districts, your reopening plans may look different. I know here in the metro, they're all different. So tell me what you're thinking. Tell me what's the plan. Samantha, let's start with you.
Our building is one that was built with, it was a remodel and add-on with a BEST grant. So it has a state-of-the-art HVAC system, and we are planning on starting face-to-face on the 17th, following as many guidelines as we feel like we possibly can. Our biggest challenge probably is going to be our transportation, because we run a fleet of Suburbans, and we have a couple of 14-passenger vehicles we use for activities. And so not being able to have more than 50% capacity on those, and trying to find extra bus drivers to drive vehicles. We have vehicles, we just don't have people who can drive them. That's going to be a real challenge for us. We are going to try to be cohorted as much as we can, and we already kind of do that because we're so small. Our secondary teachers always teach combined classes, and then we alternate years that we have a class. So an example would be like, we would offer chemistry maybe in the odd years and biology in the even years. And so our 9th and 10th graders would take biology one year and then chemistry together the next year. And that still might be a class of like 10. So because of the size of our building and the number of kids we have, we feel like we can socially distance and do the best we can to be face-to-face as long as we can without any actual positive cases here.
Thank you, Samantha. Luis, how are you going to handle COVID-19? When does school start for you?
We're also starting on the 17th, and we are reopening with a hybrid model. We had an interesting situation going on for us this summer. Center Colorado is an agricultural community, so a lot of our folks do work the fields. And unfortunately, this summer we had 2 outbreaks in 2 of our potato sellers, which affected a lot of our families and a lot of our students. So we are very cognizant about how we are going forward with our reopening plan, but we are going to reopen on the 17th. It's a hybrid model. My middle school students, because of distancing and space as well as staff, will be coming to school Monday, Tuesday, and then they will be working remotely on Wednesday Thursday, and the high school will be doing the opposite. They'll be here Monday, Tuesday, they'll be home Monday, Tuesday, and in person Wednesday, Thursday.
And Tina?
Probably first, I should give some context as to what a BOCES is for those who aren't sure. BOCES stands for Boards of Cooperative Educational Services. In the state of Colorado, we have 21 of those BOCES, and they all have different purposes. To be a BOCES, it requires just 2 educational entities to join into a cooperative agreement to provide services that you can do collaboratively and collectively, more so than you could do individually on your own. And so for our BOCES in Colorado, 15 of them provide special education services to students. And so with that context, we're challenged with being a BOCES and serving multiple districts. In the Northwest BOCES, that would have been 7. In the San Luis, it's 14. We are responsive to our member districts, and we are challenged at the moment because we have districts responding and preparing in different ways. So our challenge, working with the high risk special needs population, how does that look? Some of the services that we have are not best provided virtually. They really need to be one-on-one in person, but that's challenging in itself for the safety of everyone. A population that doesn't always understand social distancing, why you wear a mask. And in fact, some of our services, it's very difficult to wear a mask in order to provide the speech language services or the occupational therapy or physical therapy. So with all that said and done, we are right now, my fellow BOCES directors and I, gathering all the information on how our districts are going to respond, and then we respond accordingly. For example, down here in the San Luis, I have 2 districts that are starting virtually. And so my specialist will provide services online the best they can. And then I have a number of others that are going, like Luis said, to some type of hybrid. So we will need to work out the schedule on how that will look. And I think all of you can just imagine one district, but try 14 districts or 7 districts and making that accommodation with the specialists that you have. But we are ready for the task. And I told my staff, the key is that we need to be nimble because things are changing on a daily basis in so many ways. So we're just going to be nimble and do the best we can for our students and schools and districts.
I think nimble is the key word for all of us, right? No matter which district or how large your district is. Robert, how about your district?
Absolutely.
If we look at it from the statewide, this is a great example of why smaller and rural school districts are really great places to learn because they are small enough and nimble enough they can make the change. If Samantha's school decides that, hey, we need to go remote online, it's actually much easier for them to do it than it is at Denver Public Schools, or our largest high school in the state is 4,000 students just about, and it's very difficult to maintain. In addition, a lot of our really small rural schools, the school I volunteer teach at, we have 3 seniors this year. We have a big classroom, so remote distancing is not going to be a problem, plus 2 of them are related, so it makes it a little easier. But the fact is that our rural schools are really ahead of the curve on this, and they are able and do an outstanding job of really pivoting when they need to.
I think that's a very valid point, and that's an excellent point to make during this COVID time. So with the shift to remote learning this past spring, your districts were having to rely much more heavily on technology. So talk about the challenges you face dealing with technology, as well as solutions in addressing the need for devices, access to internet. I know even here in Metro Denver, again, that was an issue for a lot of families. So Robert, talk about that, if you would.
I mean, as we get, obviously, again, when we think about Colorado, there's quite a bit of internet connectivity between the major mountain areas and the I-70, I-25 corridor. When we start getting off of that, it gets a little dicey. Mm-hmm. The last study I saw said between 15 to 20% of all homes did not have reliable internet access, which makes things very difficult. As a result, we saw things like teachers literally bringing packets of schoolwork out to kids during the shutdown in the spring. And that will probably continue. It's kind of the back and forth. Again, with smaller populations, it allows you to be a little more flexible. But at the same time, we really need to figure out how we can make sure that our educational experiences we can offer for the folks in the city are matched those in the rural. There's no reason why somebody in Kim, Colorado should not have the same experiences as somebody in Denver Public Schools.
Absolutely. Samantha, how are you addressing this?
Well, we had enough devices in the spring. It was getting them to the families and making sure that they had the kind of access they needed to utilize them. We were able to leave the school open so that if families didn't have good enough service, that they could come into the school in small groups or just by family and utilize the school services. We have some people, including myself, who can only use satellite internet, and that makes it really challenging because the bandwidth isn't good enough a lot of times to do, like even if you do a Zoom conference, you can either do audio with no picture, or you can have the audio, visual on if you don't have your sound on, but sometimes doing both is very challenging. So we are working to try to get hotspots for everyone to increase the capacity so that we can pivot if we would have a positive case in our district, or if we had to go back into a stay-at-home order where we had to pivot to completely remote learning.
And Luis, in Center, how are you handling this?
Like Robert mentioned earlier, we've been lucky to have a one-week program for about 12 years now. So when we have to go remote, we have the devices and our students have the experience and teachers have the experience of using Google Classroom. In regards to internet connection, again, we're pretty lucky. We do receive Colorado Health Foundation funds. So we were able to pay for quite a bit of internet around town for students to be able to connect. Our biggest issue were those students who had a poor support system at home. We really struggle with getting those few students who might not have a parent around, might not have a routine or a clean table to work on. And so we really focused on trying to reach those students. As we move forward, we feel pretty confident that if we do have to go to remote learning, we established some type of system that we can go ahead and do that.
Great. Tina?
So as a BOCES, once again, it's Cooperative Educational Services. And there are a number of BOCES that help in technology services and however that may look. As I said, each BOCES looks a little different as far as what the member districts determine as a need. And there is a need for technological connectivity and services for individual districts. And so once again, we are trying to be nimble in providing whatever support we may need, whether it's help in finding grant funding, whether it's help and support finding hotspots, or being a voice with state policy makers and legislators on improving internet connectivity in our rural areas. But we also can provide the professional learning needed for staff members as they explore the world more intensely of virtual and online learning. And so there's a number of ways that we can meet our rural districts as a BOCES in trying to offset that challenge.
And I know connectivity is one thing, technology is one thing, but when you really think about the students, there just has to be this stress on them, the social and emotional well-being of students. That how do you fit all of that into the equation, and what considerations are you taking as you look to starting the school year? Tina, let's start with you on that.
I think first I would start with staff. Many of our staff, and I'll talk more along BOCES specialists, your special education service providers. It really wasn't in their training to provide services online virtually. And so it's a whole new world, a whole new context and way of looking at teaching. the challenges, number one, of teaching special needs students, but how does it look otherwise? And so providing the training, the support, the ongoing, you can really do this, words constantly, and listening to them. What do they need? Being a really good listener to the staff, because they really know truly what that entails and what they're experiencing. So that's where we see in trying to ease that social emotional stress with the staff. We also, in helping to support our special needs students, as well as our the parents of the students, and working closely with them on how they can help be the teacher too, like so many parents have learned the past 6 months, that it can be a real team partnership in the education of the children. And so by doing that, we hope that we're easing that social emotional stress from the parents, from the students, in just making it a team effort and sharing the load.
Sure. Of course, there is a lot of pressure on the parents and on the students. So Louise, talk about how your district is handling that emotional piece.
Yeah, we are big on restorative practices. So with restorative practices, we've been talking about connect before you correct, one of them. And for this upcoming year, a big one is connection before content. And yes, we are a school and we are about achievement, but we're really going to have to connect with our students, meet them where they're at. The other thing that we've been having conversations about, and my wife is our school nurse. You guys should know. So we have conversations about obesity and overweight. So we have some of our kids who've been staying home and they haven't really moved. So now we've looked at the effect that kids who are overweight, the effect that has in education. So we've been having conversations about how we can expand our after-school programs and how we can have more kids attend bike club and skate club, and we have a climbing club and walk to school. So those are the conversations we're having in regards to addressing some of the mental health as well as some of the physical needs of our kiddos.
Oh, that's a great idea, because I'm sure, thank you, Louise. Samantha, I'm sure isolation is a big issue for your kids.
Yes, isolation is a big issue. We're 72 miles from Trinidad, which is our county seat, and then we're 50 miles from the nearest grocery store and 76 miles from the nearest Walmart. So we are very isolated. A lot of our kids are involved in everything, and they enjoy sports and they enjoy FFA and FBLA, and with all of those things being canceled in the spring, it's been really hard for them. And all they want is to be able to participate and see other kids. You know, they are busy working on their families' ranches and doing things, but they haven't had those connections. And that's what we're worried about, is that if any of that is not allowed, how the social emotional effects that's going to have on them for the rest of their lives. If they're, you know, they're really, they're so involved, and they're so excited to see each other that I know that when we did this in the spring, we even had teachers who would leave the Google Classroom like open and just kind of be in the background and let the kids talk to each other for the last 5 or 10 minutes of every classroom, just because they knew that they needed that.
Sure, that's a great idea. Great suggestion. Thank you, Samantha. So it's hard to talk about rural education without addressing school funding and the challenges in recruiting and retaining educators, right? So I'm sure it gets even tougher now in this world of COVID and dealing with an economic downturn. So how do you address that? What are some of the steps that school districts can take right now to address this during these pretty difficult times? Tina.
Okay, so one opportunity we have to address that issue in Colorado is our alternative teacher licensure program. And that is a program in which if you have a bachelor's degree, doesn't matter which area it is in, and a desire to change careers and teach, you may join an alternative teacher licensure program, which we have 26 different agencies that provide the programming. 6 of those are BOCES in the state. And what you do, it's really boots on the ground. You find a teaching position, and predominantly in our rural areas, and work through the program, learn how to be a teacher the same time you are teaching your first year. You have a lot of support, a lot of help from many different individuals, as well as the cohort in which you are in the program. But it has truly helped our rural school districts and schools find the teachers they need, because many times it is actually someone who is in the community that wants to change careers or maybe pursue a career in teaching. And so it's another avenue without having to go back to school for 2, 3, 4 years to become a teacher. So it's an alternative pathway, proven quite successful. In the Northwest region, we have had an average of 12 to 14 alternative licensure teachers each year. And out of that, we have at least a 90% retention rate, meaning they stay after their first year and they truly earn their initial teacher license beyond that alternative license. They stay in teaching, they stay in the area, they stay in the region, and typically stay in the career. So we're very proud of our retention rate in that program.
Yeah, that's excellent, excellent track record. Robert, how are you handling the issue of retention?
Well, you know, it's really interesting. Colorado has a really unique situation compared to the rest of the country, really. Is our numbers for people who are going into teaching continue to decline or stagnate, and they're just not very high. In fact, I think last year we only had 6 math teachers in the entire state of Colorado complete a 4-year degree to become teachers. So if any of you want to be a math teacher tomorrow, please email me today and I will get you a job tomorrow. One of the big challenges that we have, and Tina brought up, where we can get you in the classroom, and we have 4-day weeks to really help teachers kind of balance the work-life scenario. But until we can take care of some of the really big source areas of why we're getting these shortages, which is quite a bit has to do with compensation, quite a bit of it has to do with the perception of the industry, we're going to continue to kind of do this Band-Aid approach. And unfortunately, it affects the rurals first before it really spills over into the suburban and urban districts. They do great things with limited resources, but until we see some systematic change, we're going to continue to have those limited resources.
I imagine so. Samantha, speaking of rural, I mean, that must be a challenge out in Kim.
It is really a challenge. The BOCES that we belong to is the Southeastern BOCES, and it's based out of Lamar, and there's 12 districts in our BOCES. And I currently have 3 teachers who have completed the alternative licensure program and have stayed on as teachers. And then I have one this year who is going into the ALP program to become our English teacher. We didn't have an English teacher for all of last year. We used other teachers who were qualified because of their undergraduate hours and things like that to teach. So last year, as superintendent and principal, I also taught some high school math so that we could have the math teacher is qualified to teach English, and our PE teacher was too. So they split up that so that we could get through last year with an English teacher. Well, actually 2 English teachers. I think that's one of the greatest things in Colorado is that alternative licensure program, because there are people out there who have, their bachelor's, but they're either tired of where they're working or they'd like to try something else, and it's a great opportunity for them. The other thing that is really big in rural is kind of a grow your own. We have 3 alumni from Kim High School that are teachers here. One of them has taught here for 29 years. One has taught here for 6, and the other one has taught here off and on for about 8 as she raises her family. So that is a great opportunity. And I think that anytime that we can encourage our high school students, if they have any inclination into going into teaching, to go ahead and try to do that. And even if they decide to go try something else first, as long as they get their bachelor's, as long as we keep that alternative licensure open, then they'll have that opportunity if they desire to later.
Thank you, Samantha. It does seem like that is an issue of positions going unfilled, particularly in the rural district. Luis, talk about that. Talk about what you're doing in center to try and grow teachers.
Yeah, and in regards to recruiting and growing teachers, we really capitalize on ICAP, the individual career and academic plan, and we open our doors for any student who has any interest in becoming an educator to come and shadow and do community service hours in a school. We try to speak to them as young as we can about how lovely our being an educator is. So we do that. We also take senior block students from Adams State University, and we really try to work hard with our partnership through Adams State University so that they can come on campus, they can shadow teachers, they can do whatever teacher hours they need to do. In regards to retention, we really work hard on our culture. We know that teachers will lead principals, and I know that, so we really do work hard on our culture. In fact, this past year, we created a whole committee that was titled Teacher Recruitment and Retention, and they planned outings. We went golfing, we went to a pool one day, then they planned a whole pampering day in which we talked to local businesses, and they came in and they did manis, pedis, got a free haircut, a free meal. So we really try to capitalize and create, we call it the center family, because we do know that they're not here for the paycheck, but we do know that they want that feel of family. And again, I'm going to say this again, I know that teachers lead principals, so I'm very conscientious about that.
I love what you're doing in center. That sounds very exciting. Nice. Thank you, Luis. We've all heard that term brain drain. So let me ask you all, is there tension between students wanting to maybe be the first in their family to attend college, and also maybe leave and go do something else with their lives and leave the place where they've been raised? So how do you address that situation? Luis, let's start with you.
I actually had a conversation with one of our students who left. She attended CU Boulder and came back, and I can relate to her. I know I didn't get a chance to do my introduction, so just real quickly, I'm starting my 14th year in education. I was born and raised in Mexico, came over to California. They came to Colorado to play football. I am a first-generation student. And specifically in speaking to the students, she said, yeah, there is a lot of tension because you do want to leave and get educated, but sometimes it feels like you're choosing, she said, money over family. And then when you do come back, because I was asking her about that, some people feel like you failed because you came back to center instead of, staying in Denver or Boulder. So she expressed a lot of extra stress and anxiety because she does want to come back and give back to her community, but she does not want to feel like she failed. And so she's stuck in a very difficult spot where she doesn't want to be seen like she's leaving, chasing the money, and then she doesn't want to be seen like she's coming back and failing. So that is a very real point that our specifically first-generation students feel that tension of going off to college and being the first to do so.
Yeah, I think we can all relate to that dilemma in some way. Samantha, how do you address this?
It's difficult to get kids to come back. The ranching communities are probably the same way as many rural communities, where the ranches have either gotten large enough that they need help, or they're either downsizing so they don't. So there aren't very many people who come back into the community and continue on the family ranch. There's a lot of the area that's been purchased by outside interests. So there's a lot of ranches that are owned by people who live in other states and just run by somebody here. So that makes it really challenging. There's not a lot of industry besides ranching. The school is the biggest employer. So of course we encourage people to, go into teaching. We also have a lot of virtually based accountants here in Kim for some reason. We have a couple of groups that do accounting for people from all over different states even that do it from Kim. So that's another, business opportunity that we really encourage kids to go into, because they know that the people who live here who built that business will probably hire them.
And I guess that's a great point right now during these COVID-19 times, right? That you can do, I think we've all learned we can do just about any job remotely, including mine. Robert, how are you addressing this issue of brain drain?
Before I get into that, I will tell you, just the plug for Kim, the best grilled cheese in the state is at the Kim Cafe in Camping.
Ah, good to know. Thank you.
One of the bigger players in this whole field is the community college system. They have done a really great job of reaching out to local students and inviting them to come in. The next phase of this that you will see shortly is that they'll move to 4-year degrees being offered at the community college to keep people in the local community. And it's only going to be better for our schools, because we're going to get kind of this pipeline of teachers going to community college, getting the 4-year degree, and then we'll suck them back to be teachers in the old high school.
Tina,
Okay.
your turn on this.
I'll address the resort rural predominantly. So in the case of like Steamboat, Aspen, Breckenridge, in Colorado Vail, there is an attraction for our mountain rural students to possibly come back and work in the ski industry. It is attractive. There are a number of job opportunities and such. So in that situation, it is somewhat easy. I'm not going to say it's really easy to keep and attract the students, but to stay in their hometown, or at least come back for 6 months during ski season. But in all honesty, it is challenging to keep and attract the students in a small rural town. There aren't that many opportunities. My own personal story, like similar to Luis, I was a first generation college student, but in order to leave my farm town in the Midwest, I had to go elsewhere to gather those opportunities. And there really wasn't an opportunity for me to go back as far as teaching. The school was closing because there weren't enough students. It was way too small. But that brain drain is a really important issue. And we know that there are places in the world that are giving quite the incentives to come and live in their small rural area, buy homes for $1 and those kinds of things. And I just wonder for rural Colorado down the road, what type of incentives will we need to develop and implement in order to maintain and not have that brain drain occur even more.
Sure, that's a great question, and certainly a valid point. I just want to remind all of you who are watching, listening in, that we can take a couple of questions from the audience. So if you have a question, put it in the chat box, and then we will try to get to a few of them. But let me ask you all: do you have any programs in your district that are there to help first generation students, to help them succeed? Any particular programs? Tina, do you know of any?
To be honest, I'm not aware of any that really focuses on that. There's been a lot of conversation, but nothing concrete.
Okay, and Samantha?
One of the things that we're able to do through our BOCES and our partnership with Lamar Community Colleges offer a lot of concurrent enrollment classes for our students through a distance learning situation. And so I think that has really helped our kids to get a leg up to go to college. But we don't really have any first generation things that I know of, except for what our local or area community colleges offer. I know there is some scholarship money at many of the community colleges if they're first generation, or if they do really well in high school. You know, there's a lot of like presidential scholarships and things from the junior colleges. So we always encourage that. Many of our kids do get away from Kim. They don't have their associates by any means, but they'll get away from here with at least a semester's worth of college credits, or maybe a little bit more, so that maybe it isn't quite as stressful to have the culture shock of moving from Kim, Colorado to even somewhere as small as Pueblo to go to a 4-year school.
Robert, how about in your district? Oh, you're on mute.
I'm sorry, there are various initiatives obviously going on, but unfortunately a lot of them are really geared towards the urban, suburban area, simply because you have the critical mass, right? I think of the Gear Up program running out of the Department of Higher Ed, really helping people prepare for high school or for college after high school. The fact is that we just don't have that set up in the rural districts yet. That being said, community colleges are very excited about going into that direction. I think it's about kind of laying the groundwork and getting that foundation going.
Thank you. And Luis, how about in your district?
Yeah, I mean, we have partnerships with Asst State University, and we have an awesome camp program, college assistant, migrant program, also partnerships with the migrant education program. But I like to talk about a program we have in our school district, and it's a parent involvement program in which our goal is to educate first-generation families about the educational system in the United States, but also about college. So I specifically run the program. I get them in. And then every year, one of our main goals is to fundraise so that we can take the whole family to visit a college campus. So over the past 3 years, we've visited CU, we went to UNC, we've also visited the University of New Mexico. And the whole idea behind that is when a kid goes to college, especially a first-generation student, the whole family's there, and it's a success for the whole family. And I specifically have conversations with parents about, you know, when he or she starts calling you after that first semester saying, hey, I miss you, you're going to have to be very, very strong and say, no, I love you, but you cannot come home. We can help you figure it out, but you cannot come home. Just on a personal story, the first time I came to Colorado, I was 22 years old, and I missed it too much, so I went back, and then it took me a whole year later for me to snap out of it and realize that I needed to move out of the house. So that's a program that's been pretty successful for us.
I can imagine that getting buy-in initially is a challenge. How do you start those conversations?
I talk about their kids. I talk about statistics. And what I do is in a big room, I have anchor charts and I say, you know, write the names of your kids. And of course, every parent is going to be very proud. And then I say, you know, 60% of Latinx students will drop out. So I go around and I start Xing their names out. So when I make it personal and I get an emotional reaction out of them, then we can talk. And I said, I'm speaking about your kids. I'm not talking about, you know, some statistic out there. That's how we started. But now we're talking about center school district students.
Excellent. Okay, so we have a question from someone and they write, I live in a place where there is a lot of denial about COVID. I work with a fourth grade teacher on lesson planning. They've expressed some deep concern about schools reopening. What ways can we support rural teachers who are working with students from families who do not take COVID seriously? I'll let any of you jump in on that. Anybody can jump in anytime. Thoughts?
I will say that I would say, Hannah, you're not alone. We all are experiencing various degrees of seriousness with COVID and challenged with that as well, as far as what to do. I think one key piece that we are doing here in the BOCES, and whether it's been up in the Northwest or down here in the San Luis, is really ensuring that staff have all of the safety equipment and protocols in place to protect themselves the best they can. And much of it is with education and a lot of conversation with families as well. But I think key is that you're not alone at all. Everyone's working through that one.
Anybody else want to comment on that?
I think it's interesting. The number one goal that we all have as educators is to keep kids safe. That's our number one overarching goal across anything. As a result, you know, if it means that we're taking extra precautions, then great. Our job is for any parent that maybe objects is the fact that, hey, even maybe overkill, but we're going to keep your kids safe. As long as we're doing that, we're doing everything we need to do.
Right.
Yeah. That's great messaging. All right, here we have another question. For those going into a hybrid model, how are teachers adapting to balancing in-person and online instruction? And what are the changes for administrators? How are students and families adapting to virtual environments? And what are you hearing from them? I know that's a lot in one question.
I'll try to answer that one. So we do employ the project-based model. So we're really encouraging our teachers to take advantage of the in-person time to do a lot of the preloading of information, as well as the explanation of the project, so that when students are at home, they're able to work on the project on their own. We are not asking our teachers to teach on those off days because they will be supporting the high school. We haven't really seen too much pushback. They're not fully back yet, so I might encounter some pushback. But so far, the biggest misconception has been with the community, because during fourth quarter, I did create a schedule and we did Zoom meetings and we used Google Classroom. So it's taking a lot of information to let our parents know of what it's going to look like. So that's where our issue's been, not necessarily with our staff.
Anybody else care to add?
I agree with Luis. I think that communicating to the parents and the teachers what's expected of the students and the teachers, and making sure that if we have to do a hybrid model or have to go to fully remote, that we're ready to do that in a better way than we were in the spring. I mean, most of us were on spring break when everything got shut down. So a lot of our kids didn't have their books or anything at home. We used some creative ways to get things to them, but none of our teachers were really prepared to do online learning. And so I think we've done a lot of professional development during the summer to try to help our teachers be ready. But I think having more of a communication about what school's going to look like if it has to go to the hybrid model, we're hoping that we kind of do the hybrid model for even kids who are not home with COVID, or if they just need to be home because they have something else wrong, or if they're home because of some kind of family issue.
Sure.
If they have the opportunity to do online in those situations, I think it will help our families in the long run.
We have one final question here that they're asking, how are your budgets affected by the changes? Are your budgets affected yet? Are you having to make cuts, or are you thinking about having to make cuts? And if so, in what areas? Maybe layoffs, perhaps?
For BOCES, I'll go first. For BOCES, we're not looking at making cuts at this point. Funding is okay. I will tell you, we do rely on our funding from our member school districts, as well as special education funding, both from state and federal. But what we're finding is that we're having to rearrange where we typically would spend money on in-person type of trainings, and that become virtual, which in many ways is a money saver. And then you're able to put funding into maybe protection equipment, personal protection equipment, or some more online training or equipment that is needed maybe for children in their home as parents are doing some of the teaching. So it's a little bit of a shuffle at this point with funding from a BOCES standpoint.
I think most districts, rural districts, they'll be okay this year because there's some state support and different mechanisms. The following years are going to be really tough. And I'm looking at Samantha, knowing that her budget always has budgetary shortfalls, and managing that moving in the future is going to be a big challenge.
I've heard that.
I would agree with that.
Go ahead, Luis.
I would agree with that. I think our budget was okay. Where we saw the biggest hit in regards to budget is we benefit from quite a bit of money in grant money. So some of those grants were not, we were unable to get them. So I think that's where we are seeing the biggest impact in regards to budget.
Well, I just want to say thank you all so much for all your insight today and speaking frankly about a really a difficult subject, because it's all new ground, isn't it, for all of us? I think we're all figuring out how to make it through and get the school year off to a great start. So I would just personally like to say thank you for including me in this discussion. Thank you to the Nathan Yip Foundation. And Carol, I will hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Anne, and thank you to all of our panelists. It's been very, very interesting listening to each of you, and we really realize how critical the rural population is, and there doesn't seem to be the same kind of programming to deal very directly with these kinds of issues. So thank you for coming today, and just so you know what's ahead for the rest of this week, tomorrow we have hosted by J.C. Wharton, who's head of our rural equity team at Global Minded, economic development and related socioeconomic considerations in rural America. He's got several really incredible panelists for that. And then on Thursday, a man named Ron Lazard, who does, he's from the Department of Education, works with the White House. He'll be doing fortifying Native students, faculty, and communities during and after COVID-19. And then JC again on Friday for Native American business opportunities, tribal economic development, and post-secondary education and workforce participation. So we hope you'll join us for those. If your schedule is busy, we have a YouTube channel, and each day of the week we'll have the links to the preceding session. So this session will be in our newsletter tomorrow, and we'll continue to have that featured throughout, and you can recommend to your colleagues. All of those sessions on our YouTube channel are free, and our newsletter is free, where we profile many of the amazing people who are those like the people who are featured on this panel. So we'll be reaching out to you all because I'd love to feature you all in our newsletter. So we'll follow up with that, and thank you, Tarika, and all the wonderful people from the Nathan Yip Foundation. It's been really great working with you all on this. So thanks so much, and we'll see you all next time. And we'll be following up on other ways we can have an impact for rural students, educators, parents, and communities during this COVID time and beyond. Thanks again.
Thank you all. That was a great panel.
Bye-bye.